disease. He is the author and co-author of over 400 peer-reviewed papers on a spectrum of hepatobiliary topics that include liver transplantation, chronic hep C, HIV, and liver and the HCC. And he serves on the editorial boards of prestigious journals such as Liver Transplantation, Hepatology, Liver International, and is an ad hoc reviewer of several journals. His current research interests includes areas of liver transplantation, viral hepatitis, and hepatocellular carcinoma. So, let us hear from Dr. Reddy about the therapy of hepatitis B, C current status.
All right. Thanks very much for the generous introduction. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. This is my third trip to Myanmar and hopefully not the last one. I really enjoy being in Myanmar, a lovely country, and I particularly like the various temples that you have, fortunate enough to have these. I'd like to thank the organizing committee and Professor Nguyen for having me out here. So there will be a bit of an overlap between my talk and perhaps the subsequent speakers, and something that I was going to touch upon has already been touched by Professor Dhanwandi. Nevertheless, it won't hurt to hear certain things again and again. So these are my disclosures. Now, you've seen this already, but again, to set the stage for my talk, one would need to appreciate the genotype prevalence in Southeast Asia, particularly Myanmar, where we are now. You can see that half the cases of hepatitis C in Myanmar are due to genotype 6 infections, about 30% due to genotype 3, a challenging infection, and then you have a few genotype 1 infections. Around 10% of the infections are genotype 1. And then, of course, if you go to some other countries such as Laos, about 95% are genotype 6 infections, Vietnam, or 50% genotype 6. Then, if you were to go to Philippines or Malaysia, you'll see a different distribution of the genotypes. Now, we had some interesting discussion about interferon, and interferon had been the backbone of hepatitis B therapy for quite some time. For those of us who have been in the field of clinical investigation in hepatitis C, we began with interferon. Of course, interferon was used earlier in hepatitis B, and still is talked about, as you saw in hepatitis B. Began with human leukocyte interferon, went to recombinant interferon, and we've pretty much written an obituary on interferon in hepatitis C. There are select situations where it does seem to work, but that may not be for long. And the select situation I particularly am alluding to is genotype 3 infection. You'll hear a bit of that from Professor Foster subsequently. I'm not sure it will have much of a role in DAA failures, particularly if there's emergence of resistance, but that remains to be seen. So interferon is still useful and has been used quite extensively in certain parts of the world where DAs are a little slow to get to or are considered expensive. This is an experience from Myanmar that Professor Naomi shared with us while she was a visiting faculty in Penn. She had data on 687 patients who had visited her, and of those, about 331 were enrolled in a treatment program. About 288 had completed therapy, and the strategy was 48 weeks of interferon and ribavirin for genotype 1 patients, 24 weeks for genotype 2, and then for genotype 3, there was 24 weeks of treatment, except that if they were surface antigen positive, they received 48 weeks, that is co-infected with B and C, And then in the non-RVR patients, they also received 48 weeks of treatment. So this was the kind of strategy that we had when interferon and ribavirin were the only drugs available for treating hepatitis C. And as you can see here, patients did quite well. If you particularly look at genotype 3 and 6, they're in the region of 80% sustained virologic response, which I must say is quite a good response with interferon-based therapy. And we recognize to some extent why such good response is seen with interferon and ribavirin in Asia, and that is because of the IL-28B genotype, which is a favorable genotype of CC. Well, we want to obviously move forward and then try and eliminate interferon and ribavirin if you can, particularly because of the side effects related to interferon and ribavirin, and because also the duration of therapy, which is at least 24 weeks, in some cases 48 weeks. So you've seen this before. There are a number of drugs that are out there that have come out that target various regions of the virus, such as those that target the NS3-4A protease region, the NS5A region, and the NS5B region. The drugs that target NS5B region are categorized into two: the nucleotide NS5B inhibitor or the non-nucleoside NS5A inhibitors. So there are any number of drugs out there, and it's usually a combination of these that are used to treat hepatitis C. So it's become quite simple under ideal circumstances. The pill burden could be very small. It could be as simple as 1 pill a day, co-formulated lenacapavir and sofosbuvir, and then soon to become available, in fact, just become available in the US, co-formulated ruzasvir and remdesivir, a protease inhibitor and an NS5A inhibitor, and another combination of the nucleotide NS5A inhibitor sofosbuvir and a pan-genotypic NS5A inhibitor remdesivir has undergone extensive phase 3 testing, and we hope it becomes available sometime in summer, at least in the US and Europe. Then you have 3-DA regimen that has a slightly higher pill burden, and particularly if you were to add ribavirin, it could be as high as 10 pills a day. And then you have other combinations of cimetrivir, sofosbuvir, daclatasvir, sofosbuvir, and esomeprazole and daclatasvir. So you have to understand certain characteristics of these drugs. As I said, you kind of mix and match these drugs, and you have the protease inhibitors, NS5A inhibitors, and NS5B inhibitors, the non-nucleoside and the nuke. And the efficacy varies. If it's a red dot, it's least efficacious and has at least favorable profile. And then you have yellow, which is an average profile, and the green is a good profile. You have to particularly understand that there is a resistance issue with these drugs, and one that is sustained over time is NS5A resistance. It's become apparent now that some of the patients are failing treatment because of the emergence of NS5A resistance. We've in the past had failures due to protease inhibitors as well, but what is known is that at least clinically relevant or significant nucleotide NS5B inhibitor resistance is rare. Now you can look at it this way: there are any number of players out there in treating hepatitis C, and you do have a platform, and you could potentially pick an NS5B nucleotide polymerase inhibitor as a platform with or without ribavirin, and combine it with a pan-genotypic NS5A inhibitor or a protease inhibitor, or you can use it along with interferon and ribavirin as it's been used. Now, you can also use an NS5A inhibitor as a platform. Daclatasvir is a good drug when it comes to NS5A as a platform. And then you also can use a pan-genotypic protease inhibitor as a platform, but we really do not have pan-genotypic protease inhibitors out there in practice. We've had predominantly genotype 1 and genotype 4 activity protease inhibitors out there, but hopefully down the road we'll have patent protease inhibitors. So this is how one looks at treatment options for hepatitis C. So I'll focus on genotype 1 and 6. I will leave genotype 3 to Professor Foster, who's going to address it during his talk on special populations, although I'll talk about some of the advances that have been made in genotype 3 and some treatments that hopefully you can expect this year. Now, genotype 1, it appears that about 10% or a little more than 10% of the case of hepatitis C in Myanmar are due to genotype 1. And there are several options that you can consider, and these are not necessarily in order of priority. You can use sofosbuvir and lenacapavir for 12 weeks. You can use the 3-day regimen of ritonavir boosted protease inhibitor paritaprevir along with midosvir and dasabuvir with or without ribavirin. And there is a variability in treatment duration and the use of ribavirin based on genotype subtype and presence or absence of cirrhosis. And then you can use sofosbuvir, imipravir, or declinidzevir and sofosbuvir. And that is for 1A, and the 1B also is similar regimens. But if you were to look at ritonavir boosted paritaprevir regimen, there's no requirement for ribavirin here. Now, what is the basis for these recommendations? The first study that was done with sofosbuvir involved pegylated interferon and ribavirin, but just for 12 weeks we used to treating patients for 24 to 48 weeks and thereof interferon and ribavirin, but here treatment duration was truncated 12 weeks. And here very good response rates were observed in genotype 1, about 90% sustained virologic response. And there were very few genotype 5 and 6 patients. There were only 7, all of them achieved sustained virologic response. So this was an advancement over pegylated interferon and ribavirin, where a directly acting antiviral along with interferon and ribavirin was able to achieve good response rates while the treatment duration was shortened to 12 weeks. Then came along a combination of an NS5A and nucleotide NS5B inhibitor, lenacapavir and sofosbuvir. It's been extensively studied through 3 clinical trials called the ION trials, and based on these trials, the recommendation is that for treatment-naive patients with or without cirrhosis, 12 weeks of combination therapy is adequate. Treatment-experienced patients without cirrhosis, 12 weeks. Treatment-experienced patients with cirrhosis is 24 weeks, although there's data to suggest that there, with the use of ribavirin, you can truncate the treatment duration to 12 weeks. And as been pointed out, if the viral load is low, less than 6 million units, and the treatment-naive and non-cirrhotic treatment duration can be shortened to 8 weeks without compromising sustained virologic response. So these are the studies that form the basis for these recommendations, ION-1 and ION-2, treatment-naive and treatment-experienced patients. About 20% of those were cirrhotics. These studies explored 12 and 24 weeks duration with or without ribavirin. You can see the sustained virologic response were quite high, above 95%, and these studies were basis for recommending just 12 weeks of treatment without ribavirin with this regimen. Now, if you were to look at subgroups though, particularly treatment-experienced cirrhotics, the 12-week regimen or regimens with or without ribavirin did not do well, and this is the basis for recommending 24 weeks of sofosbuvir and lenacapavir in treatment-experienced cirrhotics. What I want to point out is this is the basis of an 88-patient cohort, and that's what is recommended, but a subsequent larger study from France that looked at treatment-experienced cirrhotics, even those who failed in protease inhibitors such as telaprevir and boceprevir. 12 weeks of sofosbuvir and remdesivir and ribavirin achieved high response rates. So for cost reasons, you can actually shorten duration to 12 weeks, but you need to add ribavirin. Now this is the treatment-naive patients without cirrhosis, exploring an 8-week regimen with or without ribavirin, and also a 12-week regimen. High response rates, over 90%. However, the relapse rate was higher in the 8-week regimen when patients had viral load about 6 million. So for that reason, 12 weeks is recommended for those who have viral load above 6 million, less than 6 million international units per ml. 8 weeks of treatment is adequate. Now you have this other combination as well. I'm not sure whether it's available here or not, or whether it's on the horizon, but it works very well against genotype 1 patients. And then, of course, it also works for genotype 4, where you actually don't need the non-nucleoside NS5 inhibitor. But if you had this regimen, you could follow these recommendations based on various studies. You can anywhere from 12 to 24 weeks. The 24-week regimen is for genotype 1A patients with cirrhosis. For genotype 1B, you actually don't need ribavirin, and they do quite well. And here again, you'll see, based on these studies, treatment-naive and treatment-experienced patients without cirrhosis, they had high response rates of over 95%. So the regimen is quite effective. In cirrhotics, the treatment duration was 12 weeks or 24 weeks, and you can see high response rates in these cohorts. But this is all genotype patients 1A and 1B. And of course, there are some differences based on whether they're 1A or 1B. 1A doing better with ribavirin. Genotype 3, briefly I'll mention, as it will be covered, but you heard